All right, welcome everyone to the launch of OUTA's 2025 Y.AU report. I'm Rebecca Papillo. I'm the Director of Media and Communications at OUTA. I'd like to start today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which I'm coming to you from today, the original home of the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation, and would like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's commitment to innovation and technology over many millennia, a commitment we at OUTA deeply respect and share. Now, before we get the session underway, I do want to let everyone know that we are recording the session, so you can watch it again later and we can share it with other members of our community. But now onto our 2025 Y.AU report. Our report builds on our inaugural report, with updated research, and the report is designed to give small businesses valuable insights into how a .au website or email can help build trust and help you get ahead online. Today we'll take you through the key findings from the report, and we're joined by an expert panel. Dr. Bruce Tonkin, who stepped into the role of OUTA CEO in January of this year. Many of you may be familiar with Bruce. He's a long-standing member of the domain name sector and has been, previously was OUTA's Chief Operating Officer from 2018. We're also joined by Duncan Rusby, the founding director of Sagacity Research, who conducted the .au research that we'll be talking about today, and Rachel Colasso, who's the General Manager of Business Growth at Business Chamber Queensland. Rachel works closely with small businesses and has a really great understanding of the importance of a strong digital presence. So after the discussion, we've allocated time for questions, so please take the opportunity to ask them via the Q&A tab in Zoom. And we are going to share a link. If it's not already there, it'll be in the chat in the next couple of seconds to the Y.AU report, which is available on the OUTA website. With that, I'm pleased to hand over to Bruce to introduce the report.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm very pleased to be here today to officially launch OUTA's 2025 Y.AU report and discuss the crucial role that .au plays for Australia to be able to access the sort of social and economic value that the internet provides. We regularly conduct surveys to see how people are perceiving the use of .au, and this basically report from our research builds on the work that we've been doing for several years to sort of grow the use of .au in Australia. We are the 7th largest domain name space out of countries in the world. And so clearly that from a per capita point of view means that we're one of the highest using nations of the internet and internet services and domain names. A key part of that is, I guess, our remote location from the rest of the world. And it's interesting that the traffic that we observe coming in for people doing queries for .au is predominantly coming from outside of the country. And so that shows that we interact with many people around the world, either to use services from around the world or to provide our services to other countries and other people in the world. As shown on this slide that you can see on your screen now, you'll see that we focus on providing a very reliable infrastructure, which is the .au infrastructure. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We manage many thousands of queries every second for the domain names in our system. We also administer the licensing rules, which is basically who's eligible for a .au name and what names individuals can have for their name. A key part of our rules, which is distinct from other licensing rules, is that we require you to have an Australian presence, which you can meet by being a citizen or having a company or a not-for-profit organisation in Australia, or if it's an overseas organisation that it has a registered trademark in Australia. And we validate that at time of registration, and we validate it at time of renewal, and we have a complaints process to manage any instances where a domain name is registered in breach of those rules. We put a lot of effort into multi-stakeholder processes, which is that our rules are developed by the community for the community. We administer the rules, but the actual rules themselves are developed by getting stakeholders from different parts of Australian communities, so that business, government, not-for-profit, universities, individuals participate in developing those rules and recommending which rules need to change. And then we administer them and make sure that the rules are adhered to. We then advocate for that same model of governance in other countries and in other parts of the world. So we're active in international forums trying to encourage that same approach, which is to engage all the stakeholders in developing the rules, not just one stakeholder. Some countries it's very government focused, other countries it's very private sector focused. Australia is relatively unique in that we actually combine the best elements of all of those different models and get people together to come up with our rules that relate to the domain name space. I think I'll probably hand it back to you at this point, Rebecca.
Fabulous. Thank you, Bruce, for that welcome and for that introduction. I think if we flick over to the next slide, Hayley, we just have, we have a couple of stats there as well that are in the research report. So .au does, as Bruce was touching on, serves a lot of people. And so the 7th largest country code, top level domain in the world, and the 10th largest of all the domains rather. So up there with the .com and .org. So it certainly has a high reach. Now, I am shortly going to hand over to Duncan, who'll take us through the key takeaways from the research that we've featured in the report, along with these ones that you can see now, which are some of Outer's own stats and from a VeriSign report. That's released to the domain name industry each quarter. But a reminder that if you do have questions for any of our speakers today, you can pop them into the Zoom Q&A tab, and we'll put those to the panelists later in the session. So with that, I will pass over to Duncan.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. And yes, well, thank you for the opportunity to come in and join you today to talk through some of the research we've done for you. And thank you to everyone else who's joined us on the webinar today. So I'll give you a quick overview in terms of just the methodology for the research that we did. This was actually the 3rd wave of the research that we've conducted now. So we're starting to build up some sort of good tracked information, and we're just in the process now of actually wrapping up the 4th wave at the moment. In total, we did just over 2,000 online surveys, quantitative online surveys. And we conducted those across five audiences. So we're trying to get sort of about 400 interviews in each of the audiences. The first 2 of our audiences were the business audiences, our small to medium enterprises. We classified those as businesses that had less than 5 employees or turnover less than 2 million. And we split those into two distinct segments. So one was those small to medium enterprises that had a registered domain name. And the other one then, a slightly harder group to find, were our SMEs who didn't have a registered domain name at this stage, but did state they either intended to register a domain name at some stage in the future, or had some form of online presence. So the only ones we spoke to were those businesses that didn't have any form of online presence. The other 2 segments, then the next 2 down, were our consumer segments that we spoke to. And again, our consumers, we split out into those 2 same groups. So we had our consumers who currently had a domain name registered for personal purposes, whether that's for a personal website or a personal blog, or for email even. And then conversely, again, we had our consumers who didn't have a domain name registered, but again, did have some intent to register a domain name for personal purposes. And then the last group down the bottom there kind of straddles both those, our SMEs and our consumers. So these were essentially what we've called our entrepreneurs. So these are essentially consumers, but they're looking to establish a business within the next three years. So they kind of sat in the middle of those two groups. This year, for the first time, obviously we did our sort of 2,000 quantitative surveys online, but this time for the first time, we followed those up with some in-depth interviews, and those are done by the excellent Helen at Grounds Truth. So she went in and spoke to a number of these SMEs, including those without domain names, in great detail to understand their attitudes and their intent to domain names, and any sort of barriers around registration and need for registering websites, and how that kind of liaises with other forms of online presence that they might have. So if we jump to the next slide, I'll just run for a couple of slides here just to give a few some of the key findings coming out of the research. The survey itself is very extensive. We've got about a 50-minute survey, so there's a lot more findings coming out of it, but these are some of the key ones. If we start with our consumers, first of all, what we saw amongst, or what we continue to see amongst our consumers is a very strong preference for websites with .au domain names. And that's both from a registration and a usage perspective. If we look at registration, and that's websites that they've registered, or domain names they've registered, or those they're considering, it's about almost 2/3 of them state preference for an AU domain name. And the majority of the rest, their preference is kind of split between some preferring .com, but the others really not being too sure at this stage. So that's kind of from the registration perspective. But from the usage perspective, what we see, and this is the websites that they choose to visit to purchase or find information on, is that 3 in 4 of them state they're more likely to trust an Australian business if the website ends in AU. So that's 75% of consumers will have more trust for a business if they have a website ending in .au. And in fact, what we find is that only half of them, actually up to half of them, will only purchase from a business online if the website ends in AU. And there are a number of factors that drive that preference for AU. A lot of it is driven around a desire to support both local businesses, or support Australian business and local businesses, but also a strong desire for consumer protection. And we see that increasing a bit over time as well. And that can be a desire for consumer protection, or just to ensure they're protected by, or businesses regulated by Australian law. So just providing them with that kind of reassurance around any purchases that they are making. If we jump to the next slide, yes, this one here, what we find is that the top attributes that consumers associate with AU domain names that they register are, obviously Australian comes through very strongly. They get the notion that it's an Australian website, and that really ties into their desire to want to purchase from Australian businesses or local businesses. But it's also very recognizable, and really importantly down the bottom there is it's trustworthy. And what we see when we measure trust, that there's a lot more trust associated to .com.au compared to .com. It's almost about a sort of 50% increase in trust for .com.au versus .com, and that really drives their preference to go to those AU domains over and above .com when they're looking to make a purchase. So if we jump to the next slide, then so that was kind of from our consumer perspective. We can talk here then about kind of the perspective from our small businesses that we spoke to. What I might do is actually just start at the bottom point there, where we noted that actually 3 in 4 Australian consumers will only purchase from a business online if it has a website, which is a very important finding when it comes through to talking about our SMEs there who don't currently have a website or a domain name registered. So a lot of them have a strong online presence, whether it's through social media or marketplaces. And importantly here, when we look at the role of websites, it's very much about complementing their existing online presence. So it's not about a website replacing social media, it's about complementing that existing online presence. And really providing that reassurance to consumers. And as we saw on the previous slide, that a lot of consumers will only purchase from business if they're online, but also if they've got the Australian website. And it's just about providing that reassurance. They may still purchase from you through social media, but they want that sort of backup through the website, just to help build credibility and trust. And we see that then amongst our Australian businesses, where a lot of them will choose the AU domain names because it signals to their customers that they are credible and that they are Australian. So they're hitting the right notes there that consumers want. and very much because it helps them connect with local customers and really builds trust with them as well. And that's all around playing into the notion that customers want to purchase both locally but also Australian first and foremost. And in fact, what we find is that 7 in 10 Australian businesses now use an AU domain name for their website or business email. So very similar to what we see of consumers, is a very strong preference towards the AU domain names above and beyond other ones that are available in the market. And typically what we see is amongst the businesses that have got a preference for com, it's because they are generally trying to position themselves as operating internationally and they're dealing overseas and they don't want to be seen necessarily as tied down to Australia. So very functional reasons for them choosing com. But for those that are wanting to operate in the local market, very much that preference towards .au domain names. Which I think was my last slide there, Rebecca.
Fantastic. Thank you, Duncan. That was a great overview of the research, and it's been a really helpful project for us, helping us to better understand how consumers and small businesses consider .au. And it's really also helped us just put some data behind what we have known at Outer for a long time, which is that .au plays a really important role in Australia's digital economy. And when you see some of those stats, you really see the ways in which it's helping small businesses get ahead and connect with their consumers. So a reminder to everyone, we do have put the link to the report in the chat, so that's available on the website. And now we are going to hear from Rachel from Business Chamber Queensland, and then head into some questions for the panel. So thank you, Rachel, for joining us today. You work with small businesses day in and day out in your role at Business Chamber Queensland. So you're able to bring really great perspective from that experience. And where I thought we would start today is maybe just a little bit of insight from you, from the conversations you have with small businesses about their online presence. What are some of the key themes and insights that you're hearing from them?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Rebecca. And thanks so much for inviting me. It's great to be here and to talk about this really important topic. I might just take a couple of minutes just to talk a little bit about Business Chamber Queensland, who we are and what we do, just to provide a little bit of context. So Business Chamber Queensland is the state's peak body where Queensland's Chamber of Commerce and Industry, we represent about 497,000 businesses across Queensland, of which majority are small, medium enterprises. We do this with a network of local and regional chambers, so it's about 114 of those, and we are here to support business every day, to advocate for them, to really listen and understand what businesses need to thrive moving forward. So we do that by representing businesses from every industry, every size and every region of Queensland. And Queensland is a big state, as we all know. And so the use of technology and especially websites to access, for businesses to get access to customers and their supply chain is really, really important in Queensland. So a lot of what we hear from businesses is similar to, I think, would probably be the same experiences of businesses across Australia. I think from a technology point of view, and one thing I would say is congratulations on the report. It really gives good insight of how customers are viewing and the importance of .au and websites as far as businesses are concerned. Technology we've been talking about for a while, and when you're looking at a macro level of economics, things that Australia is grappling with at the moment includes productivity, making sure that we are competitive and making sure that we are adapting to an ever-changing world. So technology is central to that. Making sure that we are seen by consumers is really, really important. And that's the biggest takeaway that I have from this report, is that it really shows how .au and a website can build that credibility and trust for consumers. So when they are provided with a lot of options both here and in Australia, it really is ticking off those requirements from a consumer point of view and for businesses. The themes that we are finding for businesses, though, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, is that technology is changing really, really quickly. And it's really difficult. It can be challenging for businesses to stay ahead of that trend and to really know what to put on their websites, how to use technology effectively to make sure that they break through and are in that vision, the consumer's vision. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but that's really what some of the themes and trends we're seeing is that at the moment, because of technology changes, we've got a continuum of businesses who at one end are really struggling with digital literacy. And at the other end, when we're talking about advanced technologies and who, you know, all of the fancy things that technology and websites can do and how they connect to everything, are finding it difficult to get skills for their businesses. So it's a really interesting environment at the moment.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for that overview of your work with Business Chamber Queensland, as well as your insights on the report. I might throw to Bruce now, and we've heard Rachel's top takeaway from the report. So, Bruce, I'm keen to hear what your top takeaway from the report is as well.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. Look, I think the takeaway that for me is really that overall businesses that use .au are finding that as their sort of main channel to interact with their customers and users. And so while a lot of businesses are I guess have a choice of forums, so many businesses will establish an Instagram page, many businesses will establish a Facebook page. They're good for I guess getting an initial lead, but to actually convert an interested person to an actual customer is still relying on actually having a website where people feel that it's a real business. There's some credibility behind the organisation that's running that business. There's usually additional information. So if you're looking at a restaurant, you can find out opening times, menus, a range of other facts. Whereas what you might see at an Instagram page might just be some photos of people dining in the restaurant. So the website gives a much richer experience that you need before actually making a decision. You know, does the restaurant support gluten-free food? You know, those sorts of things won't typically pop up on an Instagram page or a Facebook page. But if I go to the website, I can get that additional level of information. And so that's playing out in the report where consumers are saying that they're much more likely to purchase from a business or book a restaurant that actually has a website, even though they may have originally discovered that business through social media.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bruce. And one of the points you touched on there was about credibility. So I actually want to throw to Duncan and ask a question. So trust in .au comes through really strongly in the report. 3 in 4 Australian consumers are more likely to trust a business online if it has a .au in its website. I'd love to hear from you how those levels of trust compare to different levels of public trust in different arenas at the moment. We do hear a lot about trust, and you obviously do a lot of research in a range of spaces. So how does that compare?
Cool. Yeah, no. Thanks, Rebecca. Great question. And I think a really pertinent question as well. And as you say, we do a lot of work with trust across a whole range of different sectors. And I think one note, first of all, you know, it's never directly comparable when you compare trust in the namespace versus other kind of organizations, you know, but ultimately it compares very well. But the really key point for me that I see coming out when we look at other trends in trust in other sectors is just the importance of that level of trust that consumers have in .au. When we look at across a range of different sectors, the biggest trend that we've seen in the last year is a sort of a gradual sort of erosion or softening of trust across a lot of sectors and a lot of industries. And it really comes down to a couple of things. One is kind of an ongoing cost of living pressures for consumers, which is impacting consumer confidence, which generally impacts then how they rate a lot of these surveys when it comes to rating satisfaction or rating trust indeed. So it's not necessarily something that's been fundamentally done wrong by organisations. Consumers are just a little bit less confident. But really importantly as well, there's just higher levels of disinformation coming through at the moment as well, and that's really impacting consumers' trust, particularly their trust when it comes to using or sourcing information or buying products online as well, which just heightens the importance and the critical need for businesses to have that sort of online presence and to help cut through that noise, to prove that they are credible, to prove that they are trustworthy. And that really comes from having not just an online presence, but having the right online presence and the mix of that online presence, whether that's having the website or particularly the com.au or au main names as well, to really help sort of build those notions of trust amongst consumers, because they're looking for whatever they can grab hold of at the moment.
Great, thanks, Duncan. So Rachel, kind of building off what Duncan was just speaking about there, how important do you find is it for small businesses to have that trusted online presence to be able to build credibility when they're connecting with their consumers?
It is everything. I mean, when you are wanting to talk to your customers, and also noting that customers don't necessarily mean retail customers. It might be another business who is purchasing. It might be professional services. It might not be products. It could be a person. So trust is everything. I mean, I like to think website is your business's front door. So if you're walking down the street, the high street, you make snap judgments about whether you're going to go into a shop based on the front window. Website is a business's front window. So, it is really important to have a professional looking website. So, I mean, .au is absolutely the first hurdle you're over, as far as, and the report clearly shows that as far as .au establishing that credibility and trust. But the other thing that is important is to make sure that the information that you have on your website, the look and feel of the website, is also does more to build up that trust and credibility. So, you've all, it's really important to, and you can build relationships. So have a good look and feel of a website, make it an easy journey for customers, have an actionable item there. What do you want people to do? What is the action that you want them to do? Do you want them to phone you? Do you want them to purchase from you? Do you want them to fill out a survey? What is it that you want to do? So trust and credibility is everything in business. I would also like to point out that .au, from a Google analytics point of view as well, they do prioritise local businesses. So that local, having a .au means that you can, again, establish credibility and trust locally with your community and with your network, which is especially important when it's a really crowded space. I think it is all about, for me, it is all about putting yourself in your customer's view and building that relationship up, and then maintaining it.
That's great. My next question for you, Rachel, is going to be about tips for small businesses, and I think you've covered that off really nicely there. We have had a question on the Q&A line from Colin. And so I might ask Bruce to have a go at this one first, and then Duncan might want to speak to the data afterwards. And the question is, if the panel could speak about the advantages or benefits of having a com.au or compared to a .au direct. And so Colin asks, should we be thinking about moving away from com.au towards .au direct? And I'm wanting to hear a little bit more about what .au direct is and how that can benefit people.
Yeah, it's good question. I think it depends on whether you're a new business that's getting a domain name in .au for the first time versus an established business that already has built up brand recognition around, say, .com.au. So perhaps I'll start with the established business first. As an established business, most companies that have been around for more than 5 years or so in Australia will have a .com.au name. They've built up their branding and their recognition, if you like, online using .com.au. For those businesses, .au is more an additional name that they can register to help with things like marketing campaigns when you need a much sort of shorter, simpler name. So, for example, if you're going to use an advertising billboard and you want to use a very large font size so people driving down the freeway can read the domain name, you're better off with a shorter name that you can use in a font that's 1 foot high on the freeway versus a font that's not easy to read. So that short, simple name works. Same with radio advertising. If you want people to remember a domain name at the end of a commercial, if it can be something simple like go to outer.au, it's something that people can remember. So that's a sort of where you've got a core name in .com.au and you get a .au as an adjunct name. Conversely, if you're a business starting for the first time and you're looking for a domain name, there are about 3.8 million .com.au names. It's actually very hard to find a short name in .com.au to create a new business name or an easy to pronounce name. So .au gives you the opportunity. You're much more likely to find a new name for your business in .au than you would in .com.au, and you also get the benefits of a shorter name. However, if your business is going to be it's a brand new business, but you're going to do a lot of online commerce where there's actually financial money being transacted through your website, so online shopping or online sales of some form, then .com.au gives that trust marker really that it's a commercial website and you can trust actually exchanging information directly with that website. So for a startup, I think .au, you're more likely to find a name that you need and it's good for brand recognition. But if you're a startup and you're actually expecting to do sales online where there's some money, payments via credit cards, etc., .com.au is still that most recognised name for commercial activity.
Thanks, Bruce. Duncan, did you have any insights from the research that you might be able to add?
Yeah, just a couple of insights that kind of really back up exactly what Bruce was saying there. When we've gone out, and some of this was in the qualitative research that Helen did as well, when we talked to some of the small business owners. There's a lot of appeal for AU because it is shorter, and some of those sort of functional benefits. It's shorter. You can come up with a much easier kind of website. It's not as as long off the tongue when you're giving your website to someone. Some of the sort of functional benefits. But on the other side, exactly as what Bruce was saying there around, if you're establishing a business where it's very much commercial, you want to do sales and the retail side of things, then com.au is probably the slightly better option at the moment. Because it is more recognizable. We saw earlier on in the slides I presented that com.au just has high recognition, and .au just isn't as recognizable at the moment. It hasn't been around as long. It's not a fault of .au. It just hasn't been in the market for as long. And that similarly transgresses to the measures of trust that we get. So as I mentioned earlier, com.au is about 50% more trustworthy than com when we look at the overall metrics. But .au is a little bit behind com.au, and that's just because it hasn't been around for as long, and trust does take time to build, and it comes with recognizability as well. But importantly on that note, the levels of trust we get for .au, and this was correct a year ago as well, is on a par with .com, which I think is fantastic, given it's only been around for such a short period of time. Trust levels for .au are on a par with .com.
That's great. And that's right. .au Direct has really only been around for 3 years, or not even quite 3 years yet. And we're seeing it be a really popular choice. So about 1 in 5 .aus are a .au Direct. And we do have some really great information on our website. If you search .au Direct, you can learn a little bit more about it and how it can be really a great starting point for a new idea and entrepreneurs, as Bruce and Duncan were speaking about. So on that note, I might go back to Rachel with the question about so heading back to small businesses and their online presence. And are there any gaps when you're speaking to small businesses? What are the gaps you're finding? What are the things that they struggle with? And are there any tips or recommendations or resources you can point them in the direction of that can help when they're thinking about starting and establishing their online presence or building on their existing online presence?
Thanks, Rebecca. And I might just add something to the previous question as well. I think that whenever, and this kind of overlaps what you're asking me, customers have to be front of mind no matter what you're doing as far as online, etc. So whether you use a .com.au or a .au, going back to that trust and credibility, what do your customers recognise? Because if you're in different industries, that recognition might be different. You know, if you're small business in a small, regional area where you're dealing mostly with small businesses and retail, for example, and this is a huge generalization, that might not be, people might not be as familiar with .au, but are certainly familiar with .com.au or .edu.au, or because that's what we all, from a demographic point of view, grew up with. But if you're dealing in the tech space, then obviously that's a different kind of customer that you're dealing with. So my number one tip is actually going back to who you're trying to sell to and what do they recognize. And I think that is the biggest tip of starting up. So when you're building up, just like a marketing plan with technology, is how are you going to access the people that you are wanting to engage with as customers? I think looking at the skills, and one of the biggest barriers that we are seeing from small business, I talked about the continuum, is actually the lack of knowledge or a perception that it's all too difficult. We recently did a Future Digital Work report, which I think that you are going to share the link to, and that was really interesting. We spoke to small businesses across a number of different topics. And one of the main things that came out was that over a third of businesses really didn't feel that they had the right level of knowledge or skills to engage with technology. So that includes setting up a website. Now, there are plenty of programs out there and support out there for businesses. The first tip that I would give is actually your local community engagement, whether it's reaching out to your membership associations, your local chambers, events, webinars such as this, the State Chamber as well. And you'll probably find a lot of free micro-credentials to get your knowledge up, webinars, but also meeting people and talking to other small businesses about what their experience was like. I think the other thing is start simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. It is really getting that message out to customers to make sure that it is clear messages and action orientated. The other thing that I would say is data. Not enough people are using data to make sure that anything that they're doing on their website is actually successful. So you might think you have an amazing .au website, but it's not actually, when you look at the analytics, the Google Analytics, it it will say whether your customers are actually engaging with the content. So it won't be whether it's a .au or .com.au, it will actually be what is the content on there. And there are so many easy ways now, especially with AI, to actually really connect and get the right messaging for your customers. So it's a clear website up there. So rounding that all up, really, when you're talking about what are the barriers for businesses, it is knowledge. I think is perceived knowledge. So knowledge is power. Reach out to your networks. One thing, it's content. Make sure you know your customers and that you're putting really simple and action-orientated information up on your website. Use data to make sure that what you're doing and you're actually getting value for money in your website. And another one which I'm going to talk about, and I know .au is really important. This is cybersecurity. So make sure that when you're increasing your knowledge that you understand and you've got a secure website, because small businesses are really targeted. And as I said, technology is moving so quickly that cyber criminals are, quite savvy, and they're moving quite quickly as well. There's lots of free resources out there from government websites, from your local chambers, and from other organisations in order to check that you are protected.
That was a fantastic response. Thank you, Rachel. I was taking down notes myself. And one thing that you mentioned there that stood out to me was about starting simple. And that came through really strongly on our research, in our research as well, particularly the qualitative research that the team did, where people can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelmed by the idea of creating a website, but actually it can just be a couple of simple pages. And by not having that website, you really risk losing business. So it's a really important one to keep in mind, of course, as is being cyber secure when you when you set up. Now, a reminder, if people have questions, to please do send those through to us on the chat. I do have another one for Duncan myself, though. Duncan, you've undertaken this research for Ada now for a couple of years, and you're also a business owner yourself. So when you put those two things together, what do you think is the most important thing when it comes to building and maintaining an online presence?
Cool. No, thanks, Rebecca. And yeah, it's one of the reasons I've enjoyed doing this research, because when I set up Sagacity Research, I went through that exact conundrum myself at the beginning stage, and I was initially thought, oh, I don't need a website. I'm a professional services firm. I've got my client contacts, and I'll go in and talk to them. But after having a few conversations with people, I did set up a website in the end. And I think importantly to note a couple of things that Rachel says there, that, and this is the reason why I set up the website in the end, is that, a website is not just for commercial or retail organizations. It can be for those professional services organizations as well. And it's critical as that point of providing, my clients and my customers, that reassurance that, you are who you are and you've got that extra credibility there. And I think to the point that Rachel notes there, it doesn't have to be, multiple pages and this all bells and whistles website. My website is literally just a couple of pages, and that's all you need there to help sort of provide that credibility. And I think importantly, and probably more so in the retail space, in terms of sort of building and maintaining that online presence, it's, I think, really important to recognize that we are in that ever-changing world, as Rachel says, and there's increasingly use of social media particularly amongst some of the younger generations coming through. They'll often use social media in place of Google. It's one of the things that Helen had a lot of great conversations around with some of the younger audience that she spoke to, that increasingly things like TikTok are replacing traditional websites and Google for finding organizations for services or for products. So they'll increasingly use social media, but that doesn't rule out the need for that website. As I mentioned before, a website is a very strong complement to social media, because a lot of those consumers will not, they might find you through social media, but they won't actually buy through you through social media unless they can visit a website as well to help get that credibility and understand who you are. So by only being on social media, there's a big part of the market that you're then just leaving off the table. whereas it really then helps to sort of complement. And I think understanding how those will then complement each other, it can be very powerful for businesses. Absolutely.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that with us. I've got another one here that I might, from the audience, that I'll ask Bruce to have a go at. So our attendee asks about, so one of the findings in the report was that Australians find .au websites Australian, recognisable and trustworthy. And they're wondering, how does Outer maintain those attributes through other work that it does? So what are other areas, I guess, that we look at when we think about building trust in Outer and .au?
Yeah, I think that's an important question. So one of the things that we put a lot of effort into is making sure that the person that is operating a .au website can be held accountable for what's done with that website. So we validate at the time of registration a person's name, their address, their business identifier. So it could be an Australian business number or an Australian company number or a trademark number. So we validate all of that at the time of registration. And so if somebody ends up, if you purchase from a .au website and you don't get what you've paid for, you get the benefits of all the Australian law, consumer protection agencies and things. You can report that business, and the full name and details of that business are available through our Whois service. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes people try and get around that system and put false information in there. But we monitor sort of international sites and local sites for any reports of scams that relate to domain names. And also with our local enforcement agencies like the ACCC Scam Watch or Anti-Scam team. And they report names to us that have been reported to them by consumers. Then we investigate. And if we find that the information provided in the registration of that name is false, then we will cancel that domain registration. And so collectively, that means that we've got, because we take an active approach of validating at time of registration and a very active approach of following up any complaints or reports of misuse of the name system, that overall we have one of the lowest levels of abuse in .au compared to any other domain namespace around the world.
Thanks, Bruce. We have another question here from Colin, so thank you, Colin. This one's also for you, Bruce. But should businesses be concerned about protecting their brand from being hijacked? So if they've got a well-established brand name or brand, if that happens, what should people do, and how should people preemptively protect against that?
Yeah, certainly to preemptively protect, it's a good idea to register your domain name, your brand, if you like, across the main namespaces. So in Australia, if it's a business, that would be .com.au and .au, and also try and get the same name and .com. So that gives you sort of a solid base of brand protection. If somebody does infringe a brand, we do have a dispute process, which is called AUDRP, and that's administered by an external dispute process that looks at the brand that you have. You know, is it a registered trademark? Is it a registered business name? Has the other party registered that name in bad faith? You know, they're not actually conducting that business. They might be trying to leverage your brand, etc. So that's a dispute process that's available to everyone. The best way of if you've got a brand is to actually get an Australian trademark, because that gives you the best protection under law. You're protected then under Australian trademark law, and you get the most benefit from a dispute resolution process when you can show that you actually have a registered trademark for the brand that you have.
Fantastic. I think that's a great summary of how people can think about .au domain names and building their brand and protecting their brand. So I think we're quickly coming towards the end of the webinar. And one last question for you, Bruce, that I was going to ask was just around, we've been talking a lot about small businesses and how we support small businesses online. And are there any other points you can talk to about how Outer does support the small business community?
Yeah, look, I think part of supporting the small business community is making sure that there's a robust framework for small businesses to operate in Australia. So that's part of the framework through the sort of GST system, where people get a registered ABN for perhaps a sole trader or a business. I think supporting the concept of business names and having them registered again means that you've got better protection around that name because it's a registered business name, and that the person, again, you can look up a database and see the person that's behind that registered business. And then our process of then using that information and putting that in our Whois service means that a consumer can actually check who's behind a domain name. Do they have a registered business name that corresponds to that name? Do they have are they properly registered to do business in Australia? So they've got an Australian business number. So the numbers that we have in our Whois can all be traced back to other government databases that the public can look up. So it gives assurance, if you like, around the credibility of that business. And then we work very closely with the enforcement agencies in Australia, whether it's the federal police, whether it's a local police like New South Wales Police, or whether it's another regulatory agency like the ACCC, and encouraging them to report any names that are being used for scams, and we will investigate them and particularly focus on whether the information behind that name is true. And if we find that the information behind the domain is not true, then we delete the domain name.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. So with that, I think it's time to bring the webinar to a close. I wanted to thank again Duncan and Rachel for joining us. You brought some really great points forward, lots to think about for all the small business owners and managers and those thinking about starting a small business that are on the line. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. Really appreciate you taking the time today. For .au members, we do have an upcoming webinar with our .au affiliate partner Sprint Law next week. So the webinar aims to help small businesses understand updated privacy laws that were introduced in late 2024. So information about that and Outer's other events can be found on the Outer website, as can information about the .au membership program. We have spoken a little bit about cybersecurity today and the importance of cybersecurity for business. And there is a great offer for small businesses to get cybersecurity support from an expert Australian organisation that is available through the .au membership program. So visit our website to find out more about those things. And of course, if you're not yet a member, you can join at our website. So thank you again to our panelists. Thank you for our audience and for those who contributed questions. We've really enjoyed today's discussion, and yeah, look forward to hearing more about what you think about the Why.au report. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, everyone.